Earlier today, Blizzard announced some huge changes to Mythic Dungeons starting in Dragonflight Season 4. At first this looked like just a level squish, but I assure you there is more. This is a nerf to the level of difficulty of Mythic Plus dungeons for any players who are just looking to get their weekly keys done for a high level vault reward, and I think that is flying under the radar for a lot of people. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to break down Blizzard's big blue post for today, but first don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, let's start at the top of the page here. Dragonflight Season 4 dungeon changes ahead. And we'll just start right at the beginning. Dragonflight Season 4 brings with it a variety of changes, including new adjustments to dungeons, their progression, and rewards. In the player feedback loop. As a part of ongoing development in Dragonflight, the development team identified 3 issues to address based on community feedback regarding the dungeon system as it is. Heroic dungeons are barely distinct from normal dungeons at maximum level, and that distinction mostly only matters during a few days after players reach max level. This is true. I can't really remember the last time I did a heroic dungeon outside of the very beginning of hitting the level cap on a character. Mythic Zero dungeons rapidly lose relevance a few weeks into an expansion once the Mythic Plus season starts, with occasional exceptions for the weekly event quest. Also true, the last time I was ever in a Mythic Zero dungeon, outside of it being the weekly quest where I'm just spamming out 4 Mythic Ruby life pools to get that heroic raid cash on an alt, I think it was just before the first raid opened of, basically every expansion. The only truly in-game dungeon mode currently revolves around a timer. This means that other than new mega dungeons, there really isn't a place for in-game players who enjoy a more methodical dungeon pacing and gameplay. Given the combination of 2 underutilized difficulties and a gap in meeting player demand, we're restructuring dungeon difficulty and rewards in Season 4. Heroic difficulty and rewards will move up to roughly the current level of Mythic Zero. These dungeons will remain available to queue into via Group Finder. Mythic Zero difficulty and rewards will move up to roughly the current level of Mythic 8 to 10, but they won't have a timer or affixes, which probably makes them a good bit easier. The existing Mythic Plus system will pick up where that leaves off, so that a Mythic 5 in Season 4 is roughly equivalent in difficulty, reward, and Mythic Plus rating to a Mythic 15 today. Here's a visualization of the change, and this is really helpful for kind of fleshing all of this out and understanding how they've laid this all out. So as we know, in Raid there are 4 basic difficulties. Looking for Raid, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic. They're basically trying to structure dungeons to work the same way. There are normal dungeons, which are, the naming of them being offset from each other is a little confusing, but looking for dungeon is like, I don't know that they would want to go that route. Maybe they should, but the naming will essentially be normal, heroic, Mythic Zero, and Mythic Plus, and those will be equivalent to LFR, normal, heroic, and Mythic Raid. I think it's good to have this sort of a parallel across the 2 systems. No timer like the present. Season 4 changes will apply to all 8 of the Dragonflight dungeons. As part of these adjustments, we have a few goals in mind. Recalibrate core difficulties to align with seasonal player experience and progression, serve the community who enjoys dungeon content but feels that Mythic Plus content isn't for them due to the pressures of taking part, and create a better environment in Mythic dungeons to prepare more players to take part in Mythic Plus. One of the most notable changes players can look forward to is the removal of the timer for Mythic Keystone dungeons for what are currently 0 and 10. Players can run through these dungeons at their own pace without the need to watch the clock while still honing their skills. I think these second and third points here really kind of nail exactly what they're going for, and I think they're really good for the game and for the broad community of people who play World of Warcraft on the whole. Giving more people more ways to play the game at whatever their level of in-game is a good thing. In the last several expansions, the game has tended more and more towards shoving people into the box of doing Mythic Plus. That is kind of the end game for a lot of people. Like, I like Mythic Raid, I kind of view that as the preferred end game for me, but there's the structural issue of having to get 20 people together at the same time to go do these pretty difficult bosses that can take a lot of pulls, a lot of failure along the way, and it kind of makes sense that Mythic Plus, with the intention of you just kind of throw together 5 people, 4, and yourself, and the chances of success are pretty high. You're probably going to clear the dungeon, hopefully time it, get some rewards out of it. It makes sense that Mythic Plus has become the default approach, but a lot of that is because the other alternatives, the non-timed dungeon alternatives, basically don't give a meaningful reward outside of the very initial parts of gearing up a character. As soon as you've gotten LFR gear, basically. All of those other methods of gearing up through dungeons have fallen away, and they've kind of realized that's a big mistake, that's a problem with the game, and shifted to at least giving the possibility of getting like normal raid level gear out of doing Mythic Zeros, and then heroic raid level gear out of the Mythic Zero weekly vault reward. I think that's a great transition, and it's really good for the health of the game to have that sort of level of variety for players to engage in. Now let's take a look at the changes for each difficulty. Normal is the same, heroic is basically just being shifted up to be equivalent with where Mythic Zeros are now. Mythic Zeros in the future will be tuned to be equivalent to a +10 dungeon in terms of reward and difficulty, but without any of the timers and affixes and all the limitations that come with doing a Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus is then going to have a reward system that goes from 2 to 10, with +2 starting at what would be a 11 in the current Mythic Plus system. A 5 should be about as hard as a 15, a 10 would be roughly equivalent to a 20, and affixes start at +2, +5, and +10. So that means you're always getting Fortified and Tyrannical if you're in a Mythic Plus, and that's kind of a given. It means that at the top of the sort of heroic bracket of Mythic Plus, a +5, you get your second affix, and then at the very top of the sort of Mythic level affixes where there's still a reward structure, a +10, that is where you get your second affix. Dungeon ratings should be equivalent to what they represent in the current system, that's fine, and there should be a smaller range of keystone levels to find groups for, more meaningful progression between each level. I think this is good. You know, the difference between like an 11 and a 12 or a 12 and a 13, it's a bit much. It's a bit too spread out and granular. You know, a 22 versus a 23, like, you know, I think shrinking that number of levels down is good. Now, there is a little bit of a weird thing where they've kind of done this a few times in the past. There have been expansions where a +10 was kind of the top end of the reward structure. Then there have been times where it was a 15, then a 20. It seems like they're sort of expanding and contracting over and over again like an accordion. I think for people who are currently engaged in the game, keep up to date, that's fine, you just adjust and it's not a big deal. But for people who are, say, stepping away from the game and coming back, treating it like a seasonal game, that could be a little bit disorienting. I like the idea of shifting the levels down, making the difference in key levels be a bit more meaningful, and I think this is a good idea in general. I just would like for them to make some tweaks as they need to, but more or less commit to this idea. I think that having the idea of like, I did a +12 in 2022 is the same as a +12 in 2024 and 2026, or roughly equivalent, and not like a 7 is the same difficulty as a 23 because a year has passed and a new expansion came out. I also want to note here, the very first sentence in this section says Season 4 changes will apply to all 8 of the Dragonflight dungeons. Now, they're not explicitly saying that the Season 4 dungeons will be the Dragonflight dungeons, the 8 Dragonflight dungeons that were available in Seasons 1 and 2. They're not explicitly saying that, but they are at least implying that those might be the Mythic Plus dungeons for Season 4. So I don't think we can really go either way 100%, but it does sort of make me think, okay, my worst fears are being realized. It is going to be Season 4 is all Dragonflight dungeons. That doesn't sound great. Now, if they're saying all 8, though, and they actually do mean the Mythic Plus dungeons of that season, which, I don't know. It does mean that you probably wouldn't have to deal with Galakron's Fall and Mirazon's Rise, so I think I would be willing to do the Dragonflight dungeons if I didn't have to do Mirazon's Rise in Season 4. I think I can live with that. Okay, now they have this giant table here that lays out exactly where all of the gear and all of the item level breakpoints are for doing different key levels in comparison between Season 3, End of Run, and Great Vault, and it's a whole lot. We're going to skip over this. We'll come back to this in a bit because this is really where the like meat of this post lies, but it's really not like formatted in a way that's easy to read. In terms of crests and flight stones, those are changing to match the same difficulty. Some minor adjustments. Basically, flight stones are all going to work the same. You do dungeons, you get flight stones. It's fine. As for crests, they're making it so that Drake crests will come from completing Mythic Zero dungeons, which makes sense, right? Those are essentially the normal raid upgrade currency, and so if Mythic Zero dungeons are being redesigned to roughly fill the dungeon equivalent of normal raid difficulty, they should drop the normal raid currency, they drop normal raid gear from the end of dungeon reward, so I think that all works. Well, I say end of dungeon reward, that's how they have it listed in the table, but actually it's just from looting the bosses. Either way. Worm crests, which are sort of the heroic raid reward, the 10 to 15 Mythic Plus currency reward right now, that's going to be shifted over to +2 to +5. You'll be able to spam farm those just like before. And then Aspect crests, the Mythic raid reward, the 16 plus reward in current Mythic Plus will be from 6 and up. Again, I think that's all fine. The only weird thing here is that you won't be able to spam farm Drake crests, the normal item upgrade currency. I think that's a little weird. I don't really know. I'm sure they have some sort of contingency in place for that. I think the best approach would probably just be to make it so that you don't need so many Drake crests to upgrade all of your gear. Maybe reduce the amount of Drake crests required specifically so that upgrading that gear is a little bit faster compared to the higher levels. And that would probably offset the fact that you don't get nearly as many of them as you could in the existing Mythic Plus system where you could just spam farm Drake crests from dungeons. But they do have the overcapping system built in where if you spam farm worm crests until you hit the cap of them, it will then automatically downgrade them to Drake crests for you. You can just spend worm crests on Drake crests. So there seems to be some built-in mechanisms for ensuring that you don't get stuck not having some sort of upgrade currency, but having the one above it. Now let's cover what is, I think, the really important thing here, the thing that they kind of buried deep into this and has been glossed over by a lot of people who've been looking at this. Affixes start at +2, +5, and +10. Okay, so +2, that's kind of a given. That's not really a huge difference from how it works now. +5, that's a little different from how it is now. You know, currently it's a +7 and +14 are where those breakpoints occur, but +5, that's sort of the high end of the heroic raid level Mythic Plus key area. But +10, that is the top of the reward structure. So let's actually look at this table. Now we're looking all the way at this right column here, Dungeon Award, Season 4 Great Vault. So we're talking about the weekly reward. +10s give you a 2 out of 4 myth track item, the top level possible reward out of the weekly cache. But myth track items that are 1 of 4, you know, you would have to spend 1 more upgrade on them, but myth track items come from +8s and +9s out of the weekly cache. And the max level drops from Mythic Plus come from Mythic 9s. So if you're trying to gear up a new character and you're playing, you know, you're comfortable playing at a high level, you're playing at the top level of the reward structure, you're just doing +9s. You're doing a 1 affix dungeon. Similarly, if all you care about is getting the best possible reward out of the weekly cache, you don't care about pushing rating, you don't care about anything other than just getting that sweet gear, you can spam +9s where you only have to deal with 1 affix and still get myth track level gear out of the weekly cache. I think this represents a pretty significant reduction in the level of difficulty for people who are gearing up a higher level character in Mythic Plus. Dealing with 1 affix as opposed to 2, my preferred approach for gearing up newer characters once I've gotten them into the level of doing like above a 6 or whatever, is to spam run Mythic Plus 13s where you only have to deal with Fortified or Tyrannical and then that first level of affixes, that first bucket of affixes. So you're not dealing with the second one. And in doing that, you would get heroic level gear out of the weekly cache, and then you would get this level of gear right here, Champion 3 of 8. You would get 460 item level gear out of +13s, and then again, you know, out of the weekly cache, you're getting like hero track gear. That's sort of my approach for gearing up a fairly new bad character. In doing this approach in Season 4, you can run basically 4s and get the same equivalent level of gear early on. And you're only dealing with a Fortified or Tyrannical, you're dealing with no affix at all, just spam running 4s, and then you're going to get, again, just a hero track piece of gear out of the weekly cache. That's pretty good. And then once you've stepped up that character a little bit and you're ready to operate at kind of a higher level, but not necessarily pushing, maybe you don't care about that, maybe you just want as much item level as you can, either way, you start running +9s, you're doing Fortified or Tyrannical, 1 affix, and that's it, and you are getting the maximum possible item level out of the end of dungeon run, end of dungeon reward, and you are getting myth track gear out of your weekly cache from that. This represents a pretty substantial reduction in Mythic Plus difficulty. It relaxes the affixes for people who don't really care that much about Mythic Plus pushing, who just care about gearing up their character, while still preserving the difficulty for the people the sickos, who love Mythic Plus pushing as high as they possibly can and want it to be as difficult as possible. I think this is great. This gives something for everybody to meet exactly what they're looking for in dungeons. There is something with this system for people who don't want to do Mythic Plus at all. They don't like the timer, but they still want a challenge. There is something for people who don't care about the timer or the challenge. They just want that sweet gear and they want it as quickly and effortlessly as possible. That's me. And then there's something for the people who really want to push as high as possible and be challenged and have a really difficult, painful time grinding through that infinitely scaling content. So this is great. Even though it's not what I wanted, which was just the removal of all affixes entirely, I think this is probably better for the game because it doesn't alienate those people who love the difficulty of the infinite scaling content and the affixes on top of it. So I think Blizzard has done a pretty good job with this set of changes. I have to say I was initially a little skeptical when I started reading through and I didn't see them saying they weren't going to be bringing back Dragonflight dungeons for season 4 and they were going to be removing all the affixes. I wasn't so sure about that. But once I looked a little closer, I think it's really all going to come together pretty nicely. I'm actually pretty much on board with this. And, you know, hey, if they were to nerf some of the affixes like bursting or whatever, I think that would be okay too. All right, I think that about covers it. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Bye.